Welcome to the Sirius Report. This is Paul from the Sirius Report. And today I'm asking the question, has Elon Musk unearthed secret US money printing? And this relates to claims he made that 14 computers at the Department of Treasury and other US government departments quite literally send money out of nothing. He said, effectively, it would be insane that the US government has computers that can just make money out of thin air. And of course, this raises a number of questions as to what did he mean when he referenced these magic money computers at the Department of Treasury and other government agencies. Now, this conversation came about with Ted Cruz, and it was talking about obviously Doge's search for waste, fraud, etc. in the federal government. And he said, I think we found now 14 magic money computers. They just send money out of nothing. Now, the implication of that is, if it is indeed the case, that the government is actually not properly implementing what you might call double entry accounting, where a financial transaction has to have basically a buyer and a seller effectively in different accounts. Now, the argument would be that is impossible to believe, but the question is, if it was true, what are the implications? Because as Musk said, if it was a public company, it would be delisted immediately and it would fail its audit. It's interesting, on the back of those comments, the Department of Treasury did not respond to a request for a comment. So, having taken that into consideration, I recalled an article I wrote on my own website back in July of 2019, and this related to the issue of FASAB 56. And this also related to the extensive work that Catherine Austin Fitts and Mark Skidmore had done in highlighting at that time the missing minimum 21 trillion on the US balance sheet, and how, when questioned about this apparent oversight, the matter was conveniently buried. So, what does this relate to in terms of FASB 56? Well, FASAB sets the generally accepted accounting principle, the GAAP, for the federal government, and are used to determine the content and structure of the financial reports the federal government agencies and departments should adhere to. The adoption of Standard 56 or FASAB 56 actually came into force in October 2018, and it determined that national security concerns would have to override the need for public financial transparency. So what that means is that FASAB 56 would, in principle, allow federal entities to manipulate data and even omit spending altogether when reporting on the grounds of national security. So the first question is, what constitutes national security? Now, there's obviously some points in respect of that there is very clear cut. There's no doubt what that means. But there are other areas that could just very conveniently be referred to as being a matter of national security, when in fact that might not be the case. So what this then also raised the following questions, which we asked back in 2019. Who counts as a federal reporting entity? When and how can these entities conceal or remove financial information from their reports? What information can be removed? And when does something be regarded as confidential? And who makes that determination? And they are extremely important points in the context of this part of this podcast, but also in relation to statements that Elon Musk made. Now, FASAB 56 also allows departments within government to change their reports in ways that don't reflect their actual spending under the guise of the very grey area of how information is classified and how such information is handled with respect to unclassified reports. FASAB 56 also undermines the reliability of government accounting standards and financial statements to such a degree that arguably, from a public perspective, they become worthless. It would also allow the addition of misleading information and information to be admitted on what you might term spurious grounds. This lack of transparency is staggering, open to potentially serious abuse, and ironically, of course, was approved by the Trump administration, which is kind of interesting. And I'm not trying to necessarily link FASAB 56 to the statements made by Elon Musk, but it's interesting, of course, that this was approved by the Trump administration. So one may argue, and some will argue to the contrary, that this missing minimum at that time, 21 trillion, is indicative of the United States effectively printing dollars Zimbabwe style. And there is actually, therefore, tens of trillions more dollars in the system than conventional wisdom understands. Now, subsequently, I think if I'm correct, and if someone wants to correct me, please do so, that figure of 21 trillion then subsequently became somewhere in the order of 100 trillion. And therefore, on that basis, is this also a reason why, as I said at the time in 2019, why the world is de-dollarizing? Because they've realized that the United States has been partaking in this reckless debasement of the dollar. Now, it's one thing to be printing currency and admitting it, effectively via the Federal Reserve doing it, for example. It's quite something else to potentially be printing money for whatever purpose, to settle government bills, and not admitting to it. So effectively, your balance sheet is significantly larger on that basis. Now, whether it's 21 trillion, whether it's 100 trillion, whether it's even higher than that, is at this point kind of irrelevant. What's relevant is, has Elon Musk unearthed something that is very serious? Because if you're going to suggest 14 computers at the Department of Treasury and other government agencies send money out, basically printed out of nothing, or magic money machines, then the question is, how much of that money is unaccounted for, and why is it being allowed by the Department of Treasury to do so? I mean, because it would be a massive problem with the US government's bookkeeping. Okay, as I said, people will argue, well, they can print money. What's the problem? Well, as I said, it's a very different situation. Now, okay, it's very difficult in the context of what Musk said to actually understand precisely what he's referring to specifically with these magic money computers. But what, of course, is quite telling is that if indeed they did just send money out, basically printed out of nothing, how long has this been going on for? And how much money does this actually accrue to? I think he said something like 5 or 10%. Presumably that's of the annual budget, but I'm not sure definitively if that is indeed the case. But no wonder anybody in there really should be saying, how can the US government, in essence, issue money to pay for its own spending? Now, as I say, it's one thing printing money and admitting to doing it, but it's quite something else doing so in this underhand way. Now, does this relate to FASAB 56? Is this part and parcel of the same thing? It might well be the case, in which case, is it 100 trillion that's unaccounted for? Is this part of these magic money machines? How many more may exist? I think this is something that needs further assessment. I think maybe Musk's comments need to be further understood. I mean, and of course, some people will say that perhaps Musk was trying to communicate that resources devoted to these agencies don't have proper oversight, are properly audited, and of course that may be the case. We don't know. So there are many unanswered questions in relation to what Musk said, but also in relation to this truth came out about FASAB 56, and we're talking getting on for 6 years ago. And this must not be in any way, shape, or form conflated or misunderstood to be in relation to the government basically having effectively a printing press, meaning it can produce as many US dollars as it wants. And because on that basis, that would therefore muddy the waters in terms of our understanding as to what's going on. So I think this casts more light on this FASAB 56 and what we've discussed today. It also relates to questions as to what exactly Musk was referring to specifically, and what does this mean in reality? It could just be an accounting issue. It may be part of an auditing problem, or maybe it's something far more serious, but this cannot be swept under the carpet, and we can't pretend that this is meaningless, because it might well be extremely meaningful, and it may have extremely damaging and widespread implications, not just for the United States government, but for the very dollar itself, in terms of the fact that there may be an indication that huge amounts of dollars have been printed additionally, arguably by someone at the US Treasury, which means the US Treasury, therefore, has the capability to print money, as opposed to just the argument being, from many people's perspective, that the Federal Reserve can do so. And with that, we end this podcast. Thank you very much for listening, for all your ongoing support. Please like, share, and subscribe. Spread the word. We want to try and promote the channel and make it grow bigger, because as ever, we think it's extremely important that people are informed and not entertained. And with that, I'll say goodbye.